The summer sun beat down on the quiet suburban street, the kind of day where nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Birds chirped from the trees, sprinklers ticked away in front yards, and kids' laughter carried faintly from a block over. The calm shattered the moment two patrol cars pulled up with sirens chirping briefly before falling silent. Out stepped two officers, their mirrored sunglasses catching the glare of the sun as they scanned the neighborhood. Their eyes locked on a tall black man walking slowly back from the post office, a package tucked under his arm. His stride was steady, purposeful, his posture erect in a way that most men never carried themselves. His name was Marcus Hale. 2. The neighbors. He was the quiet man who lived on the corner, polite, disciplined, and always up before dawn for his morning run. But what they didn't know was that Marcus was no ordinary neighbor. He was a Marine sniper, one of the most decorated in recent history. A man who had operated in deserts and mountains halfway across the world, whose sharp eye and steady hands had saved countless lives. Yet here he was, back home, simply trying to live peacefully. "Hey, you!" One of the officers barked as they crossed the street toward him. Marcus stopped, set his package down carefully, and turned with calm precision. "Yes, officer. You live around here?" the second one demanded, already reaching for his belt, as if Marcus's very existence was suspicious. "I do," Marcus answered evenly, his voice low but steady. "Corner house. Been here a few years," first officer sneered. "We got a call about a suspicious male walking through the neighborhood. Matches your description." Marcus blinked slowly. "Carrying mail from the post office?" "Get smart," the officer snapped, stepping closer, squaring up in a way that suggested dominance rather than concern. "Let me see some ID." Marcus reached calmly into his pocket, every movement measured. In combat, sudden moves could get a man killed. He'd learned the art of control long ago. He pulled out his wallet and held it open. His military ID was front and center, the word Marine stamped across it. The officer glanced at it briefly, but instead of stepping back, he frowned. "Could be fake. Hands behind your back." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his eyes didn't flinch. Around him, blinds in nearby homes fluttered. A few neighbors stood on their porches watching. Some even pulled out their phones. Marcus wasn't naive. He knew the reality to cops. One black man. Accusations of resisting could spiral into tragedy in seconds. Officer Marcus said calmly, "There's no need for this. You have my identification. I live right here. Call it in." The second cop's lips twisted into a smirk. "It's funny how people like you always got a story. People like you." Marcus had heard that phrase before. Overseas, it had been muttered by insurgents who wanted him dead. Back home, it came from men in uniforms who swore to serve and protect. He held still, weighing his options. But before he could respond, rough hands grabbed his wrist and yanked it behind his back. "Hey, what are you doing?" a woman shouted from her porch, phone raised high. "Ma'am, stay back," the officer snapped. "This man is resisting." "Not resisting," Marcus said firmly, his voice carrying just enough for the cameras. "I am complying. This is unnecessary." The cuffs clicked cold against his skin. His package dropped to the ground, a small thud, echoing louder than it should. "Have." The officers shoved him against the hood of their cruiser, his broad frame dwarfed by the force of their aggression. Inside, Marcus was boiling. Not from fear. He had faced firefights, stared death in the eye more times than he could count. No, what burned was the humiliation, the sheer disrespect. He had worn the uniform, had shed blood for his country, had delivered justice with every mission he had survived. And here on his own soil, the land he had sworn to protect, he was treated as nothing more than a threat because of the color of his skin. "Search him," one officer said. "You'll find nothing but a house key and mail." Marcus replied through clenched teeth. The neighbors murmured. More phones were up now, recording. The officers seemed unfazed. They frisked him roughly, ignoring the tension building around them. "You got a weapon on you?" the officer demanded. "My weapon," Marcus said calmly, "is in a locked safe in my home, as the law requires. I am not armed." Sure. the cop muttered dismissively. He leaned in close, his breath hot with disdain. You think you're tough, huh? Walking around like you own the place? Marcus turned his head just slightly, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of steel. No. I walk like a man who's survived things you can't imagine. The officer scoffed, but something in Marcus's tone unsettled him. Still, they pushed him into the back of the cruiser, the cuffs biting into his wrists, pushed through the window. Marcus caught sight of the kids on the sidewalk, their wide eyes watching the scene unfold. He thought of the Marines he'd led, the young men he'd trained to stay calm, even when the odds stacked against them. Thought of the code he lived by: honor, courage, commitment. The cruiser door slammed shut. Inside, Marcus sat upright, his breathing controlled, his silence deliberate. He would not give them the satisfaction of panic or rage. His strength wasn't an outburst. It was in composure. In the quiet that unsettled bullies as the engine rumbled to life, one of the neighbors called out, "We've got it all on camera. We know who he is." The officers ignored her, but Marcus filed the moment away. His truth was already spreading beyond their control. The drive to the station was short. It felt longer than any deployment convoy Marcus had ever ridden in. The officers whispered up front, throwing glances at him in the rearview mirror. Their bravado was thin now, cracking under the awareness that the neighborhood was watching, that cameras were rolling. That maybe, just maybe, they had bitten off more than they could chew. Still, they carried on. The cuffs stayed tight. The booking process was cold, mechanical, designed to strip away dignity. They took his fingerprints, photographed him, logged his possessions. Marcus endured it all with the stillness of a man who had lain in the dirt for days, waiting for the perfect shot. This was another battlefield, and patience was his weapon. By nightfall, word had already spread. The video circulated online, whispers growing into headlines. Decorated Marine sniper, arrested without cause. Veteran handcuffed in own neighborhood. The truth was crawling out from under the weight of their false reports. Marcus sat in the holding cell, back against the wall, eyes closed as he steadied his breath. The other detainees watched him curiously. There was something different about this man, something unspoken that commanded respect even here. He was calm, but not broken. Silent, but not submissive. As the hours passed, Marcus thought about his service, the friends he had lost, the promises he had made to their families that their sacrifice would mean something. He thought of his parents, who had taught him dignity in the face of hatred. And he thought of the irony, how he had gone to war for freedom, only to come home and have his own freedom trampled by those sworn to protect it. But he also knew something else. His story wasn't ending here. Much. Too many eyes were on him now. The officers believed they had written his fate in a police report. They had no idea that his real story was just beginning in that soon. Forces much greater than them would come crashing through the walls of their lies. For now, he waited. Waiting was what he did best. And when the time came, he would rise. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by the weight of injustice. The courtroom smelled faintly of polish and dust, the kind of place where justice was supposed to feel heavy and permanent. But that morning, it felt like something else entirely, like a stage set for a spectacle that no one in the room was prepared for. Marcus sat at the defense table, his wrists still sore from the handcuffs the officers had wrenched on him the day before. His posture was flawless, his spine straight, shoulders squared, eyes forward. Anyone who didn't know him might think he was made of stone, unaffected. But beneath that calm surface was the razor edge of a Marine, sniper who had learned to channel rage into precision. The prosecution's table was filled with swagger. The two arresting officers leaned back in their chairs, whispering to one another with self-satisfied smirks. They had filed their reports as if the incident had been routine. Suspicious male, uncooperative, potential threat. They believed they had buried the truth in paperwork, the way too many had done before them. Their lawyer, man in a shiny suit with an arrogance that matched theirs, flipped casually through his files, clearly expecting this to be quick. The gallery hummed with quiet tension. Reporters filled the benches, their cameras and notepads ready. Some were local journalists, others from national outlets who had caught wind of the story overnight after the videos of Marcus's arrest went viral. Alongside them sat community, members, neighbors who had witnessed the event, veterans who had come in support, and strangers who felt compelled to see justice play out. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The judge entered, robes flowing, her gavel rapping sharply against the bench. Court is now in session. Marcus didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, his presence commanding without a single word. His lawyer, a sharp and steady woman named Angela Cruz, leaned over to whisper, "Remember, say nothing unless I tell you. Your silence speaks louder than they know." He gave her the faintest nod. The prosecution went first. Their attorney strutted to the podium, his voice slick and confident. "Your Honor, what we have here is a clear case of law enforcement doing their duty. Officers responded to reports of a suspicious individual in a residential neighborhood. Upon engaging the suspect, he was evasive, resistant, and displayed an attitude that raised concerns for public safety. They acted within protocol to ensure control of the situation." The words dripped like oil, coating the courtroom in half-truths. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, the only hint of reaction. Angela rose smoothly. "My client is a decorated Marine veteran who served this country with distinction. He presented valid identification when asked. He was calm, cooperative, and compliant. The only suspicious behavior in this incident was the officer's eagerness to escalate an unnecessary situation into an unlawful arrest." The judge raised a brow. "Do you have evidence to support this claim?" Angela turned to the gallery. "We do, Your Honor." Multiple videos recorded by witnesses. A murmur rippled through the room. Reporters leaned forward eagerly. The judge motioned for the bailiff, and soon the footage played on a screen at the front of the room. The room fell silent, except for the harsh voices captured in the video. "Hands behind your back. I'm not resisting." The crack of cuffs. Marcus' calm, steady voice. The officer's dismissive sneers. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. The prosecution lawyer shifted uncomfortably but tried to recover. "Your Honor, with all due respect, videos rarely capture the full context. Officers are trained to recognize subtle threats." That was when the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Every head turned. The atmosphere shifted instantly, as if the very air had grown heavier. A man in full-dress uniform stepped inside. Rows of ribbons glistened on his chest. Stars gleamed on his shoulders, 4 of them. A 4-star general. His presence was like gravity pulling every eye toward him. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the judge's gavel hovered uselessly as the general strode down the aisle. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Cameras clicking furiously. The officers at the prosecution table froze, their cocky expressions collapsing into confusion and dread. The general walked with purpose, boots echoing on the polished floor. He stopped directly behind Marcus, resting a firm hand on his shoulder. Marcus looked up for the first time that morning, and the faintest flicker of respect passed between the two men. Silent recognition shared only by those who had endured the crucible of war. The general turned to face the courtroom, his voice deep and resonant. "This man is Sergeant Marcus Hale, United States Marine Corps. He is one of the most decorated snipers of his generation. He has served his country with honor, courage, and sacrifice beyond what most of you in this room will ever comprehend." The words struck like thunder. Gasps filled the gallery. The judge blinked, visibly taken aback. The general continued, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. "And yesterday this hero was handcuffed in his own neighborhood, accused without cause, humiliated by those who wear the same uniform of service, but who have forgotten what service truly means." He paused, his voice dropping lower, but sharper, cutting through the silence like a blade. "On behalf of the United States Marine Corps, I apologize to Sergeant Hale. No man who has given so much should ever be treated with so little respect." Courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions, pens flew across notepads, cameras flashed nonstop. The judge banged her gavel. "Order! Order in this courtroom!" But her voice was nearly drowned out by the roar of reaction. The officers who had arrested Marcus sat pale and rigid, their arrogance dissolved into panic. They shifted uncomfortably, avoiding the general's piercing stare. Angela, seizing the moment, rose again. Your Honor, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client. Clearly the officer's account was false and malicious. Judge, still recovering from the shock of the general's presence, straightened. Motion granted. All charges against Sergeant Hale are dismissed with prejudice. The words hit like a hammer. The bailiff moved to remove Marcus's cuffs, the final insult undone. Marcus rose slowly, his presence towering now that he stood freely. He turned to face the general, and with crisp precision, he brought his hand. Up in a salute, the general returned it solemnly, eyes glinting with pride. For a moment, time seemed to freeze the decorated sniper and the four-star general. Bound by unspoken brotherhood, standing in defiance of the injustice that had tried to diminish one of their own, the general then faced the officers directly, his tone heavy with authority. You will answer for this, not just in this courtroom, but before every veteran, every family, and every citizen who trusted you with their safety. You thought you had power yesterday. What you showed was cowardice. Officers' faces burned with shame as the cameras captured their downfall. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. Silence was louder than any outburst could ever be. He walked out of that courtroom with his head high, the general beside him, the press swarming like bees around them. Reporters shouted questions. But Marcus remained calm, unshaken, his quiet dignity speaking volumes. For the world watching, the story wasn't just about a wrongful arrest anymore. It was about honor, sacrifice, and the line between true service and abuse of power. The image of Marcus standing tall beside the four-star general was already seared into history, a reminder that real strength comes not from authority abused, but from integrity lived, and for Marcus. It was another battle won not on foreign soil this time, but on home ground, where justice had tried to hide, but had been forced into the light. The sound of the gavel still echoed in Marcus's ears as he walked out of the courtroom, free at last, but the gravity of what had happened lingered heavily in the air. The moment the judge dismissed the charges, a wave of relief had rolled through the crowd, but it was quickly overtaken by a storm of activity. Reporters had nearly tripped over one another to get out of the pews, their cameras clicking, microphones thrust forward, eager to capture the image of the decorated Marine standing beside a four-star general. The two of them together had transformed the courtroom from a stage of humiliation into one of vindication. And the world was watching. Outside the courthouse, the scene was electric. News vans lined the curb, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Police tried to keep order as crowds pressed forward, chanting Marcus's name, waving flags, and holding signs with words like "Honor our veterans" and "Justice for Marcus." It was surreal for a man who had spent most of his life moving silently through battlefields, existing in the shadows where recognition was neither sought nor desired. Now he was the center of a storm, and every step he took seemed to reverberate. Far beyond the pavement beneath him, the general walked with him, unbothered by the frenzy, his expression as composed as it had been in the courtroom. He leaned slightly toward Marcus and said quietly, "Let them take their pictures. The truth needs a face." Marcus nodded, though his instinct was to retreat, to step away from the spotlight. He had always fought for others, not for applause. Not for recognition, but maybe the general was right. Maybe this wasn't about him alone. Maybe it was about the countless men and women who had worn the uniform only to come home and face suspicion instead of gratitude, prejudice instead of respect. One reporter finally broke through the noise. "Sergeant Hale, what do you have to say about your arrest?" Marcus stopped briefly, his eyes meeting the sea of lenses. His voice was low, steady, the same voice he had used on missions to calm young Marines who had never seen combat. "Happened to me was wrong. But I'm not the only one this has happened to. I just happened to have someone walk into that courtroom and remind the world of who I am. Too many others don't get that chance. This isn't just about MITs, about fixing a system that lets this happen at all." The crowd erupted in cheers, the words spreading instantly through microphones and onto television screens across the country. The general placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, proud but solemn, as the officers who had arrested him slinked out of a side door. They were met with a barrage of boos and shouted questions. Their faces were pale, their shoulders hunched, the swagger gone. They had believed they were untouchable, that their badges would shield them from scrutiny. But now, under the glare of cameras and the weight of public outrage, they looked like men stripped of power, exposed for what they were. Within days, the fallout began. The police department scrambled to control the damage, releasing statements about reviewing procedures and retraining officers. But the public wasn't satisfied with words. Protests erupted, demanding accountability, demanding resignations, and soon the two officers found themselves suspended, then under investigation. Their careers crumbling under the same spotlight they had tried to use to crush Marcus. Marcus, meanwhile, tried to return to normal life, but normal no longer existed. Letters poured into his mailbox, not just from strangers thanking him for his service, but from veterans who had experienced the same humiliation he had. They wrote of being stopped for no reason, of being treated as criminals despite their sacrifices. Some wrote that Marcus' story gave them hope. Others admitted it gave them strength to finally speak up at night. Marcus sat in his living room, reading those letters one by one. He had never considered himself an activist. He had been a soldier, a protector, a man who followed orders and fought battles in silence. But now, a new kind of battle was laid before him, not one fought with rifles or in deserts, but one fought with words, with truth, with visibility. The general visited him a week later. They sat on Marcus's porch, the lake glinting softly in the afternoon sun. The general's uniform was gone, replaced by simple slacks and a button-down shirt. But his presence carried the same authority. He studied Marcus for a long moment before speaking. "You have a choice, son. You can walk away from this and go back to your quiet life, and no one would blame you. Or you can use this moment. People are listening to you now in a way they rarely listen to anyone. They're ready to hear the truth." Marcus rubbed his hands together, thinking, "I never wanted attention. Out there on the field, I did my job because lives depended on it, not for applause, not for recognition." The general leaned forward, "And maybe that's why they'll listen, because you're not chasing fame, you're standing for something bigger. You know what honor looks like? Most people never see it up close. Show them." The words struck something deep in Marcus. He had always lived by the code drilled into him as a Marine. Honor, courage, commitment. Maybe those values weren't meant to be left behind on battlefields. Maybe they belonged here too, in neighborhoods, in courtrooms, in the fight for justice at home, so he agreed. In the months that followed, Marcus became an unexpected voice in a national conversation. He spoke at veteran halls, at universities, at community meetings. He didn't shout, didn't grandstand. His power came from his calm, from the way he carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had seen life and death and refused to waste words. Every time he spoke, people listened. The general stood with him often, introducing him as not just a Marine, but as a reminder of what service truly meant. Together, they called for reforms, for accountability, for respect not only for veterans but for every citizen wrongfully treated. And slowly, change began to take root. The two officers who had arrested him were eventually fired, stripped of their badges. Their names became synonymous with abuse of power, their arrogance, their undoing. Marcus never once spoke their names in public. He didn't need to. Their downfall was its own punishment. But the most important transformation wasn't theirs. Was Marcus. One evening, months later, Marcus stood in front of a packed auditorium filled with veterans and civilians alike. He spoke about his arrest, not with bitterness, but with clarity. "That day, I could have lost my freedom. Worse, I could have lost my life. But what I realize is that freedom isn't something we fight for overseas and then forget when we come home. It has to be protected here too, not just for me, for all of us." When he finished, the crowd rose to its feet, applause thundering, not because Marcus had delivered a speech worthy of a politician, but because he had delivered truth, raw and unshakable. As he stepped off the stage, the general was waiting. He extended his hand, and Marcus shook it firmly. The older man smiled faintly and said, "You've become more than a Marine, Hale. You've become a leader." Marcus didn't reply. He didn't need to. In his silence there was power, the same power he had carried in combat. The same power that had unnerved those officers. The same power that had carried him through humiliation and into vindication. The world now knew who Marcus Hale was. Not because he had sought recognition, but because when injustice tried to break him, he stood tall. Because when the system tried to silence him, a general walked into a courtroom and reminded the world of his worth. And because Marcus chose to turn his pain into purpose, his humiliation into hope for others. The story didn't end in the courtroom. It didn't end with the apologies or the headlines. It lived on every time Marcus spoke, every time another veteran found courage, every time someone remembered that justice, like freedom, requires constant vigilance. And though Marcus never sought the role, he had become a symbol of resilience, of dignity, of the truth that honor cannot be handcuffed and courage cannot be silenced.